From repurposed Star Trek toys to a hot dog truck that changed colors, this forgotten 1970s Saturday morning show hides wild secrets beneath its bubblegum pop surface. Created by the legendary writer behind Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and featuring criminals who committed acts of kindness, the kids from C.A.P.E.R. packed more bizarre production quirks, celebrity connections, and industry insider stories into 13 episodes than most shows manage in entire seasons. Fact 1. Created by Christmas legend Romeo Müller. The kids from C.A.P.E.R. came from the mind of Romeo Müller, a writer whose name might not be immediately recognizable, but whose work has been part of American holiday tradition for generations. Müller wrote the screenplay for the 1964 television special Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the stop-motion animated classic that still airs every Christmas season. He created beloved characters like Hermie the elf who wanted to be a dentist and the boisterous prospector Yukon Cornelius. Beyond Rudolph, Müller wrote dozens of other holiday specials, including Frosty the Snowman, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, and The Little Drummer Boy, making him one of the most prolific writers of animated holiday programming in television history. So when Müller turned his attention to creating a live-action Saturday morning series about teenage crime fighters who solved cases using gadgets and music, it represented a significant departure from his usual fare. The quirky humor and absurdist elements that made C.A.P.E.R. so unusual suddenly make more sense when you realize they came from someone who spent years crafting whimsical fantasy worlds populated by talking snowmen and misfit toys. Müller brought that same imaginative sensibility to the show, filling it with bizarre characters, impossible situations, and a general sense that anything could happen. The connection between holiday magic and teenage detectives might seem strange, but both required the same skill, creating entertainment that could capture young viewers' attention and make them believe in something wonderfully ridiculous. Fact 2. The Big Bologna was originally blue. When the kids from C.A.P.E.R. first started production, the team's mobile headquarters was a blue hot dog truck called the Big Bologna, and the entire visual design of the show matched that color scheme. After filming the first 2 episodes, however, someone in production decided the blue design wasn't working and ordered a complete visual overhaul. The Big Bologna was repainted in more vibrant colors, the kids' costumes were redesigned, and even some of the set pieces were changed to create a different look. Most shows would have scrapped those first 2 episodes or quietly pretended the inconsistency didn't exist, but the creators of C.A.P.E.R. took a different approach. They kept the blue-themed episodes and worked them into the series as flashback sequences, actually acknowledging the change within the show itself. Characters would look back on earlier cases, and the audience would see the original blue version of everything, creating a strange, self-aware joke that few Saturday morning shows would have attempted. The production even included dialogue referencing how things looked different back then, breaking the fourth wall in a way that was unusual for children's programming at the time. This decision turned what could have been an embarrassing production error into an intentional running gag, showing that the creators were willing to embrace the show's chaotic energy rather than trying to hide mistakes. It remains one of the stranger production decisions in Saturday morning television history, transforming a costly redesign into actual plot material. Fact 3. Their radios were modified. Star Trek toys. The C.A.P.E.R band communicators that the team used to stay in touch during their cases weren't custom-made props designed specifically for the show. Instead, the prop department took a shortcut by purchasing Mego Corporation's Star Trek communicator toys that had been released in 1974, just 2 years before C.A.P.E.R. premiered. These toys were already designed to look like futuristic communication devices since they were based on the communicators used in the original Star Trek series, which made them perfect for repurposing with minimal modification. The prop team made some alterations to make them look less obviously like Star Trek merchandise, and they added a prominent letter C to each device to tie them into the C.A.P.E.R. brand. Sharp-eyed viewers who owned the Star Trek toys or had seen them in stores could easily recognize what they were looking at, which must have created a surreal moment of recognition for those kids. This practice of using existing toys as props wasn't uncommon in low-budget children's television, but it's still amusing that a show about a youth crime-fighting organization was openly using communication devices from a science fiction franchise. The Mego Star Trek communicators were popular toys that made electronic sounds when buttons were pressed, so they worked perfectly as functional props that could actually make noise on camera. It's a reminder that even professional television productions sometimes raided the toy store when they needed affordable props that looked futuristic and interesting enough to capture young viewers' imaginations. Fact 4. They fought criminals who did good deeds. The kids from C.A.P.E.R. operated in a world where the definition of crime was stretched to absurd extremes, creating storylines that were bizarre, even by Saturday morning standards. One of the show's recurring villains was called the Good Father, a character whose criminal activities consisted of going around the city and putting extra change into parking meters so that people wouldn't get tickets. In the logic of the show, this somehow qualified as a crime that needed to be stopped by the teenage C.A.P.E.R. team, even though the Good Father was literally helping people. Other episodes featured similarly ridiculous concepts where villains committed acts that were neutral or even beneficial, but the show treated them as serious crimes, requiring investigation and resolution. This approach created a strange moral universe, where the usual clear distinction between good and bad behavior became completely muddled. The show seemed to be operating on the premise that any unusual activity, regardless of its actual impact, constituted suspicious behavior that demanded intervention. Whether this was intentional satire, poking fun at overzealous law enforcement, or just writers struggling to create age-appropriate conflicts is open to interpretation. Either way, it resulted in episodes where the heroes were essentially stopping people from doing nice things, which is a pretty unusual premise for a show aimed at children. The Good Father remains one of the most memorable examples of the show's confused approach to morality, representing a villain whose only crime was being too helpful. It's the kind of bizarre storytelling choice that makes the kids from C.A.P.E.R. such a fascinating curiosity in television history. Fact 5. P.T. named his nose. Seymour P.T., the youngest member of the C.A.P.E.R. team, possessed a superhuman sense of smell that served as his special ability, allowing him to track suspects and detect clues that others missed. Rather than treating this power with any seriousness, the show had P.T. personify his nose by giving it the name Seymour, and he would regularly talk to it as if it were a separate character. This wasn't just an occasional joke, but a recurring element of the show's structure, with P.T. breaking the fourth wall to address the audience and have conversations with Seymour about what they were smelling. The character would often narrate episodes from his unique olfactory perspective, describing cases through the various scents he encountered while investigating. It created a surreal viewing experience where a body part was treated as an independent personality with its own identity, pushing the show's already absurdist tone into even stranger territory. The name Seymour itself was a pun, since the nose could see more through smell than other people could with regular vision, which is exactly the kind of wordplay that defined much of the show's humor. P.T.'s relationship with his nose added an extra layer of weirdness to a show that was already operating several degrees away from reality. For young viewers in the 1970s, watching a character have extended conversations with his own nose must have been either delightfully silly or completely baffling, depending on their tolerance for bizarre comedy. The Seymour conceit represents how fully the kids from C.A.P.E.R. committed to its strange premise, never backing away from ideas that other shows might have considered too odd even for Saturday morning television. Fact 6. The word bananas triggered insane rages. The character Bugs, played by Biff Warren, had a bizarre psychological trigger that became a recurring element throughout the show's brief run. Whenever he heard the word bananas, Bugs would lose all self-control and begin repeating the word over and over in an escalating frenzy, unable to stop himself or focus on anything else. The only way to snap him out of this obsessive state was for someone to ring a bell, which would immediately return him to normal as if nothing had happened. This strange character trait served no real purpose in terms of the show's crime-fighting premise and seemed to exist purely as a running gag, though it's the kind of gag that plays very differently to modern audiences than it likely did in 1976. The repeated use of this trigger created situations where other characters would have to carefully avoid saying the word bananas during investigations, or where villains might deliberately use it to incapacitate Bugs at crucial moments. It's unclear whether this was meant to be a parody of hypnosis or mind control plots from other shows, or if it was just considered funny to have a character completely lose their composure over a common word. The bell element added another layer of strangeness, suggesting some form of Pavlovian conditioning that was never explained or explored beyond its use as a reset button. For a show aimed at children, having a character repeatedly spiral into what appears to be a dissociative episode is an unusual choice that wouldn't likely make it into a modern program. The bananas trigger remains one of the most inexplicable recurring elements in The Kids from C.A.P.E.R., representing the show's willingness to include bizarre character quirks without bothering to justify or explain them. Fact 7. One star tragically died. Young Biff Warren, who played the character Doomsday on The Kids from C.A.P.E.R., died from complications related to AIDS in 1993 at a relatively young age. Warren's death came during the height of the AIDS epidemic that devastated countless lives throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, particularly impacting the entertainment industry and artistic communities. He left behind a widow named Phyllis, indicating he had married at some point after his time on the show. Warren's brief television career included his work on C.A.P.E.R. and a few other projects, but like many actors who appeared on short-lived Saturday morning programs, he never achieved major stardom beyond his role as one of the teenage crime fighters. His passing represents the personal tragedy behind a show that most people barely remember. A reminder that the performers who brought these forgotten programs to life were real people with full lives beyond their brief moment in the spotlight. The show had already been off the air for nearly 17 years when Warren died, meaning his obituary likely focused on other aspects of his life, rather than his role in a children's television series that few people recalled. For the small community of fans who remembered the kids from C.A.P.E.R. fondly from their childhoods, learning of Warren's death years later added a melancholy dimension to their nostalgia. It's a sobering reminder that the energetic young performers who entertained children on Saturday mornings faced the same struggles and tragedies as everyone else once the cameras stopped rolling. Fact 8. Neil Sedaka wrote songs for the show. The Kids from C.A.P.E.R. featured music by Neil Sedaka, one of the most successful pop songwriters of the 1960s and 70s, known for hits like Breaking Up Is Hard to Do, Calendar Girl, and Laughter in the Rain. Sedaka contributed several songs to the show, including tracks called Baby Blue and Tit for Tat, bringing legitimate musical credibility to a Saturday morning children's program. What makes this even more interesting is that these weren't songs written specifically for the show and then released elsewhere. Sedaka had actually already released Tit for Tat on his 1975 album The Hungry Years before the show even aired. This means the production was incorporating existing Sedaka compositions into their episodes, likely through some licensing arrangement that allowed them to use his catalog. Having a songwriter of Sedaka's caliber involved with a low-budget Saturday morning series seems almost absurd given his status as a major recording artist. But the 1970s were a different time for how musicians approached television work. The show's musical numbers were a core part of its identity, with the cast regularly breaking into song during episodes in a format that anticipated later musical shows. Sedaka's contributions gave those musical moments a professional polish that elevated them beyond typical Saturday morning fare. For parents watching the show with their children, hearing actual Neil Sedaka songs must have been a pleasant surprise, offering them something to enjoy while their kids focused on the crime-solving antics. The involvement of such a prominent songwriter suggests that someone connected with the production had significant industry connections, though it wasn't enough to save the show from cancellation. Fact 9. The theme song wasn't on the album. In 1977, the Kids from C.A.P.E.R. released an LP soundtrack album intended to capitalize on the show's musical elements and give fans a way to enjoy the songs at home. However, the album made the baffling decision to exclude both the show's theme song and the fan-favorite track Baby Blue, despite these being among the most memorable musical moments from the series. For an album specifically marketed as the official soundtrack to the show, leaving off the theme song seems like a fundamental oversight, since that would presumably be the one song that every viewer would immediately recognize and want to own. The absence of Baby Blue was equally puzzling, since the song was mentioned frequently by fans and had become associated with the show, despite being a Neil Sedaka composition that existed independently. It's possible there were licensing complications that prevented certain songs from being included on the album. Or perhaps the producers made questionable decisions about what would sell best to young audiences. Record labels in the 1970s sometimes made strange choices about track listings, especially for albums tied to television properties where the rights situation could be complicated. Whatever the reason, fans who purchased the album hoping to relive their favorite musical moments from the show found themselves disappointed by significant omissions. This kind of incomplete soundtrack release was more common in an era before home video made it easy to revisit television content, leaving fans with albums that only partially captured what they remembered from watching the show. The missing theme song meant that even the most dedicated C.A.P.E.R. fans couldn't fully recreate the show's experience through the official merchandise. Fact 10. A shark puppet was their navigator. Among the many bizarre elements of the kids from C.A.P.E.R., one of the strangest was Mr. Featherstone, a shark puppet who lived in a fish tank and served as the team's navigator and information source. The character spoke in gibberish that somehow only the C.A.P.E.R. team could understand and translate, creating situations where the kids would have elaborate conversations with a puppet shark while solving cases. Even more confusing was that Mr. Featherstone's tank appeared in multiple locations. He was somehow present both at the team's headquarters and inside the Big Bologna mobile unit, with no explanation for how a fish tank was being transported or how the same shark could be in two places. The show never acknowledged this logical impossibility, simply presenting Mr. Featherstone wherever the plot required his presence without bothering to justify it. Having a shark serve as a navigator is already an odd choice since sharks aren't particularly known for their directional abilities. But the fact that he communicated through untranslatable sounds that only the protagonists could comprehend added another layer of absurdity. It's unclear whether Mr. Featherstone was meant to be a real shark with mysterious powers, a magical creature, or just a puppet that the team pretended was giving them information. The character fits into a tradition of Saturday morning shows featuring non-human sidekicks who provided comic relief and merchandising opportunities, though a shark in a tank is less practical than most. For young viewers, Mr. Featherstone was probably just another weird element in a show full of weird elements, but looking back, the decision to make a gibberish-speaking shark puppet a crucial member of the team is truly baffling. Fact 11. Set in Northeast Southwestern. The kids from C.A.P.E.R. took place in a fictional city called Northeast Southwestern, a name that immediately reveals the show's commitment to absurdist humor. The name deliberately combines contradictory compass directions. Northeast and southwest are opposite directions that cannot logically describe the same location. This wasn't an accidental error, but an intentional joke that perfectly captured the show's silly, logic-defying tone. Rather than setting the series in a real American city or creating a more plausible fictional location name, the creators chose something that announced from the start that viewers shouldn't expect anything to make complete sense. The name also parodied the tendency of American cities to have directional names like North Hollywood or West Palm Beach, but pushed that convention to a ridiculous extreme by including two opposing directions in a single name. For viewers who didn't think too hard about it, Northeast Southwestern probably sounded vaguely legitimate, just official enough to pass as a real place name without careful examination. But anyone who actually considered the geography would immediately recognize the absurdity, which may have been part of the appeal for older viewers and parents watching with their children. The fictional city name set expectations that the kids from C.A.P.E.R. existed in a heightened reality where normal rules didn't apply, preparing audiences for the bizarre plots and strange characters they would encounter. It's the kind of detail that demonstrates how fully the show committed to its absurdist premise, refusing to ground itself in realism, even in something as basic as geographic location. Northeast Southwestern stands as a perfect encapsulation of the show's overall approach. Technically functional, but deliberately nonsensical. Fact 12. Action figures were made, but never released. The Ideal Toy Company, one of the major toy manufacturers of the 1970s, developed a line of action figures based on the kids from C.A.P.E.R. in anticipation of the show becoming a hit. Prototypes were created for at least 3 of the main characters, Bugs, Doomsday, and Doc, representing a significant investment in tooling and design work. These figures would have joined the countless other Saturday morning cartoon and live-action show tie-ins that filled toy store shelves during that era, when nearly every children's television property received corresponding merchandise. However, the kids from C.A.P.E.R. failed to attract the viewership numbers that would justify a full toy line release. When the show's poor ratings became apparent and NBC pulled it from the schedule after just 2 months, Ideal made the business decision to cancel the toy line before it ever reached stores. This meant that the prototype figures, which had already been manufactured for testing and sales presentations, became the only examples of C.A.P.E.R. action figures that ever existed. For toy collectors decades later, these unreleased prototypes represent extremely rare artifacts from a failed television property, the kind of items that sometimes surface at toy conventions or auctions for significant prices. The existence of the prototypes shows that both NBC and Ideal had genuine hopes for the show's success and expected it to generate the kind of merchandising revenue that made Saturday morning programming profitable. The cancellation of the toy line before release stands as tangible evidence of how quickly the show's fortunes collapsed, with merchandise being scrapped before most viewers even knew it had been planned. Fact 13 premiered with Freddy Prinze. Hosting the kids from C.A.P.E.R. didn't simply debut as part of NBC's regular Saturday morning lineup. Instead, the network gave it a special promotional launch during prime time. On September 10, 1976, NBC aired a special called The Great NBC Smilin' Saturday Morning Parade, hosted by Freddy Prinze Sr., who was at the height of his fame from the hit sitcom Chico and the Man. The special was designed to promote NBC's entire Saturday morning schedule for the fall season, showcasing clips and highlights from various shows including C.A.P.E.R. Having Freddy Prinze host the special was a major get for the network, since he was one of the most popular comedians on television at that time and could attract adult viewers who might otherwise have no interest in Saturday morning programming. This primetime special represented a significant promotional investment by NBC, suggesting they had real hopes that C.A.P.E.R. and their other Saturday offerings would be successful. The special allowed the show to reach a much larger audience than it would have during its actual Saturday morning time slot, giving it maximum exposure right from the start. Unfortunately, despite this high-profile launch, the show still failed to connect with viewers and was canceled just 2 months later. The involvement of Freddy Prinze makes the special particularly poignant in retrospect, since he would tragically die in January of 1977, just a few months after hosting the special. For a brief moment in September of 1976, the kids from C.A.P.E.R. had the backing of a major network special and one of comedy's brightest stars. But even that wasn't enough to secure its survival. Fact 14, canceled after just 2 months. The Kids from C.A.P.E.R. premiered in September of 1976 as part of NBC's Saturday morning lineup, but the network pulled the plug on the show in late November after only 13 episodes had aired. This meant the series lasted barely 2 months in its original run, an extremely short lifespan even by the standards of failed television programs. Saturday morning shows typically received at least a full season to find their audience, but C.A.P.E.R.'s ratings were apparently so disappointing that NBC decided to cut their losses quickly rather than letting it continue through the spring. However, the story didn't quite end there. The show briefly returned in 1977 when NBC gave it another chance, possibly to fill a gap in their schedule or to burn off the already produced episodes. This second attempt also failed to attract viewers, and after that brief return, the kids from C.A.P.E.R. disappeared from television entirely, never to air again on any network. The rapid cancellation suggests that audiences simply weren't interested in what the show was offering, whether because the concept didn't appeal to them, the execution was flawed, or it was poorly scheduled against stronger competition on other networks. For the cast and crew who worked on the series, going from production to cancellation in such a short time frame must have been devastating, especially considering the promotional effort NBC had put into launching it. The show's failure meant that most of its 13 episodes only aired once or twice before vanishing, leaving very few viewers with memories of it and contributing to its eventual status as an obscure footnote in television history. Fact 15. Never released on home video. Despite having a small but devoted cult following of fans who remember the show fondly from their childhoods, The Kids from C.A.P.E.R. has never been officially released on VHS, DVD, or any home video format in nearly 50 years since it originally aired. The show has also never appeared on any streaming platform, making it essentially inaccessible to anyone wanting to revisit it or discover it for the first time. This complete absence from home video represents an unusual situation for a network television production, since most shows from that era have received at least some form of release over the decades. The rights situation for C.A.P.E.R. is unclear. It's possible that complicated ownership issues or music licensing problems have prevented any company from putting together a legitimate release. The music element is particularly significant since the show featured numerous songs, and clearing the rights to all that music for home video distribution can be prohibitively expensive and complicated. Without an official release, the only way to see the kids from C.A.P.E.R. is through unofficial recordings that fans made when the show originally aired or traded among collectors over the years. These recordings vary wildly in quality and completeness, with some episodes potentially lost entirely if no one happened to record them. The lack of availability has contributed to the show's obscurity, since new generations of viewers have no way to access it, even if they become curious about it. For the fans who do remember watching it on Saturday mornings in 1976, the absence of any official release means their memories can never be properly verified or refreshed, leaving C.A.P.E.R. as something that exists more as a hazy recollection than as a television show that can actually be watched.